Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Daanish TV's English language channel. And this is the global voice of the Center for Muslim World Studies. And today it is a great privilege and honor to have one of South Africa's leading human rights lawyers with us, Advocate Shabnam Mayet, who the topic that we will actually be speaking upon broadly is the incredible atrocities and suffering that's been taking place with the Rohingya Muslims, an issue upon which Shabnam has been one of the foremost activists in the world, mobilizing people around the issue, educating and bringing awareness to it, in order that something may be done to address this issue. So. Incredibly courageous activist, and I could say a lot more about Shabnam. But one of the things that we do begin the program by is asking the guests themselves to kind of give a sense. Now, I know personally that you obviously have been involved in a variety of activist struggles, despite your perhaps anathema to the word activist, but you have been involved in a variety of movements for justice, whether domestically in South Africa, whether internationally in Palestine and Iraq. And maybe you can just speak a little bit about that, and we can go into the Rohingya issue. But even before that, what I did want to ask you is basically a very contextual question. So you're in the South African context, and our viewership is of course global, but of course predominantly Pakistani, and they would love to know what South Africa is like, what kind of food, the culture, this type of thing that exists in South Africa. There's just a general lack of awareness of these things that I think that Pakistanis deserve to know about. I mean, it would be an incredible, I think, disservice to our
Thank
population.
you for that very, very kind introduction to the show. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So there are lots of Pakistanis that live in South Africa, and I know you're teasing, so I will just get into it. The thing about South Africa and activism is that it's very hard to not really be part of what's going on, especially considering our history. And so I find that people are aware, and there are protests all the time, whether it's against government policy or service delivery or international issues like Palestine or the Rohingya. And so it's a very vibrant civil society, whether we're dealing with domestic issues and, issues of corruption, or South Africans are speaking out against international issues and international atrocities. So I think that I'm very fortunate to be here. And you yourself, having lived here, you know how it is. It's very vibrant. People are constantly protesting and, speaking about issues and, constantly battling corruption. And so it is. It's a wonderful space to be. I feel very fortunate.
If you had to compare your most of your life in South Africa with, say, a country like Pakistan that you may have visited, in terms of activism, culture, life, what would your assessment be, and the context of kind of your visit to Pakistan and so on? I mean, I think our viewership would very much benefit from learning about that.
Well, I was in Pakistan over a decade ago. So from what I remember, I thought that while there were pockets of very vibrant activists and people doing amazing work in the rural areas, in cities, etc. But I think one of the issues was that the activist movement and civil society groups were not always accessible to everyone. And
Mm.
I mean, but of course, I haven't been to all of Pakistan, so this is just my experience of being in Lahore and Islamabad a bit. And so I think that I found that perhaps 10 years ago, the activist space wasn't very broad based and was a little bit exclusive. But I hear over the years that's changed, so that's a good thing.
Really? Where did you hear that from? No, I'm joking. But that, okay. The second thing that I did want, and you alluded to this, of course, the kind of activist impulse that has, of course, existed since the anti-apartheid struggle, and whether, I mean, the generations that have followed that have sustained that level, and perhaps a generation has you've skipped a generation and it's kind of come back in that sense in terms of examining all of these issues of cruelties and injustices, whether in South Africa or abroad. Your own very, I mean, early on experiences of, say, traveling abroad during, I believe, after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, as well as to Palestine. How were those experiences kind of formative in your own kind of political and ideological approach to these things?
Well, I must say, I think that there's no replacement for actually being on the ground and witnessing things with your own eyes. And after having worked, for example, on the Rohingya for 4 years, I went down to Cox's Bazar for the first time. And I think that when you work on something and you speak about something, yes, we feel strongly and we should. And solidarity shouldn't require us to be on the ground and to see horrific images of people dying and blood and guts. But there is an aspect of when you're present in the moment in that space where you understand it differently and where you actually feel the struggle differently. And I think that often people will tell you, you know, whether it's them having been to Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever it is, you know, protesters who travel to Hong Kong to join the protest, they all say the same. You know, there's really no replacement for actually witnessing something.
Which is yes, certainly that makes incredible sense. But there's very few people that actually are that actually do it, and I just want to take the moment to kind of really commend you for doing that. I mean, and like I said, at a very young age, it's also a question not only of your own choice of a communities and families allowing to go to these locations which are deemed as and are very dangerous in that sense. So, I mean, it is certainly what you said is true, but it's very
I
difficult
think it's
for
also
individuals to do that.
important. Sorry, if I can just interject.
Yeah,
It's very
sure.
important for us not to, confuse this with volunteerism. You know, coming into war
Yes.
zones and like all of these, middle to upper class Americans, for example, coming into African countries and coming and volunteering and taking their photos in besieged places with starving children, and then making it a deal in that way. I mean, when we're speaking about being on the ground, we're speaking about a human experience and a solidarity experience, and something that's very real and sincere. And I don't support volunteerism at all.
No, absolutely. And this distinction you've made is absolutely crucial because, of course, we know there's an entire Western human rights industry which often promotes these celebrities that will come in and out of various contexts and saying that yes, we support this and that. And then, just forget about a year. I mean, within a week later, they may forget about that. And so, yes, this phenomena is in fact a dominant phenomena that in terms of hegemonic in the media and intellectual culture. Okay, wow, this great George Clooney's doing something here, someone's doing something there, etc. And Angelina Jolie's doing something here, Madonna, all of these this type of stuff, as well as other, as you say, middle and upper middle class that will go there and say that, yes, I've been to Palestine, I've been to Iraq, or I've been here, etc., and I've been to this country or Sudan, and it's so bad, etc., and I've made my contribution, and now I can go back to my bourgeois lifestyle.
It's about going, experiencing it, meeting with activists, contributing, but also bringing lessons back home to continue your activism. And I mean, there's definitely a place for celebrities to raise awareness and on Instagram and on social media. But when speaking about all the rest of us, I think that it's very important that we come back and then we continue with our work. Like, it's not an isolated incident wherever it is that we're going to be part of a movement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We should not criticize someone like Bono or someone from U2. Maybe sometimes he does some good. Anyways, but yeah, no, the distinction between that and what you were saying, on the other hand, people who are genuinely involved in these struggles, who actually take incredible risks as well. I mean, to be involved in the struggle. I mean, they're taking risks to be in solidarity with people who are basically suffering incredible cruelties and injustices. And so the distinction between the two is very important. I'm glad you made it. So perhaps we can begin with, before Shai Bai kicks me off the show, and he'll probably keep you on the show. What I wanted you to begin with, just as an introduction to the topic, again, for people that may have heard of the Rohingya but don't know a little bit about the history and why it has led to the situation that it is today, the refugee crisis and the severe oppression and barbarism of the Burmese state towards them. So a little bit of if you can summarize, like, the history, how did it get to this point?
Okay, so a very short summary. The Rohingya have lived in Rakhine State, which is part of Myanmar bordering Bangladesh, for more than 800 years. And what had happened is, since the 1970s, they've been facing extreme apartheid policies and discrimination, which was institutionalized in terms of legal policies. And in the 1970s, there was a major operation by General Ne Win, which sent hundreds of thousands of Rohingya over into Bangladesh. And eventually those were repatriated. But again, in the 90s, in the early 2000s, these continuous crackdowns happened, forcing Rohingya, because of the military atrocities, to cross over into Bangladesh. And basically what happened is, in the country, Rohingya are not allowed to own land. They're not allowed tertiary education. They're probably some of the only people in the world that require government permission to marry. There's a limitation on how many children they can have. And since 2012, when there were massacres in Rakhine State, where the police actually stood by and watched the Rohingya being massacred, around 130 to 140,000 Rohingya were forced into basically concentration camp kind of conditions, where they still remain in Rakhine State. They're currently around 600,000 Rohingya in Rakhine State. And then in 2016, there were crackdowns. And of course, in 2017, the world turned its focus as it watched those drone aerial footage of 1 million Rohingya crossing the borders into Bangladesh. I don't think anyone can forget those images. And so they've been there since the end of September 2017. And what the military literally did was, it came into Rakhine State, surrounded villages. They killed men, raped thousands of women, threw children into the children who were alive into fires. They tied women to rocks and raped them to death. There were helicopter gunships shooting over villages. And so every single atrocity you can imagine, the worst of the worst atrocities, this is what was unleashed on a civilian population. And it caused Rohingya to run. Literally, they just ran for days into forests. Women who were pregnant ran for days, stopping only to give birth and cutting umbilical cords with their own teeth, and then continued running until they got to the border between Bangladesh, paid boatmen to bring them over. And now Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh is a mega camp. There are 35 camps there, and it houses 1 million Rohingya. But of course, the problems have not stopped, because Bangladesh doesn't allow the Rohingya out to earn a living. They are not in the formalized schooling system. A very small minority of them are. They're now fencing those refugee camps. They're going to put watchtowers and fences around these camps. There's cameras. There's a lot of surveillance. And today, it's an interesting day for the Rohingya, because there is an uninhabitable island called Basan Char, which is a 3-hour boat ride. And the first lot, there's back and forth, there's been this argument with the Bangladeshi government to not let Rohingya go to that island. It only emerged from the sea 20 years ago, and they've built facilities on that island. And there have been arguments with human rights organizations who have said, please let us go and see the island. Is it safe for human habitation? They are not Bangladeshis themselves. Even Bangladeshi fishermen who know that place are not living there. And today, around 1,600 Rohingya have started to make the trek to be moved to that island. 300 were already living on that island. They were there earlier this year because of trafficking, human trafficking, and and so it's really a dark day when we force genocide survivors to relocate to an uninhabitable island. So that's the summary in short.
No, that's brilliant. Shabnam, one thing I wanted to ask is, and this will be on the minds of people, is that the question of why. What is why the Burmese state is targeting the Rohingya Muslims in the first place? What is the problem? Is it part of this new wave of general Islamophobia, or is there something else, the kind of an ethnic issue? What is the fundamental problem that the Burmese state has with the Rohingya Muslims?
So there are 135 ethnic minorities, and the Rohingya have been the only ones who have not been recognized. What I forgot to say was in 1982, their citizenship was revoked altogether, giving them non-foreigner, non-national status. And so, yes, there's a huge aspect of Islamophobia because these Muslims are dogs, and these Muslims are snakes, and these Muslims steal our women, and they steal our land, and they are illegal Bengalis. And that's the biggest mistake people make. They say Rohingya are Bangladeshis, but they're not. Right? They have their own culture, their own language, their own identity. And when you say that Rohingya are Bengali, what you're doing is feeding into the Myanmar genocidal narrative.
Right.
And and so it's discrimination, it's institutionalized discrimination, it's state terror on a population, unlike other ethnic minorities, because Myanmar, as you know, Myanmar is fighting some of the longest civil wars in the world, and it is one of the largest users of child soldiers. And unlike other minorities along the Thai border or the Chinese border, Rohingya don't have a proper resistance force or their own military, as you will. And so they've been an easy target, a soft target. Their lands are resource rich. And so I guess it's a whole lot of issues.
Yeah, even though the Indian government especially, and now even the Bangladeshi government will claim, along with, of course, the government of Myanmar, that these are terrorist fighters getting training from elsewhere, etc. So this rhetoric, again, feeding into the general traveling Islamophobia from one place to the next, has been present. Yeah.
Because the minute that you say the word terrorist, then all of a sudden you can unleash the most disgusting atrocities on a civilian population and no one will bat an eyelid. And when the population is Muslim, it's always easy to say they're a bunch of terrorists. And then, it's easy. Then you can go in and kill and rape 1 million people and no one says anything. And that's literally what's happened. These are easy buzzwords. And I suppose the government of Myanmar has a wonderful relationship with the government of Israel and the government of India, all of whom are unleashing apartheid and genocide on their own populations. Yes. And so, it's working. It's a working team.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All these partners in crime. So that's an excellent overview of kind of what the
in fact, just to let you know how well they work together, Myanmar and Israel actually have an agreement as far as history textbooks are concerned, where they can speak about how they want their history to be told in that country. And so this is the extent of genocide denial, right?
Yeah.
And India, Myanmar, Israel all trade weapons as well. And that's like the level of relationship they have.
Oh, you can, very easily imagine, all of these countries say providing a narrative of, okay, these Muslims inherently, genetically, from time immemorial, presenting some type of a existential threat to our societies, and now it's just come out in this massive way, and we need to really respond to it, and you see it in all three of these places. Absolutely, that's solely true. What I wanted you to speak about now is something that you, of course, have been heavily involved in, if not the leader of the Global Solidarity Campaign. But
That's very kind.
what do you how would you assess the state of the Global Solidarity Campaign? Because it is true. I think you will acknowledge that a lot more awareness has been raised. I mean, it's certainly not also in the corridors of power in Washington D.C. Although that's a separate story in terms of how much real support they will give. But in places in Turkey, all over the Muslim world, there's been some awareness of what's going on in Southeast Asia and the ASEAN countries. There's been some awareness of this, a lot of awareness. In fact, when I was in Malaysia, of course, I mean, now this COVID thing and all of this is really putting pressure on also the refugees and that are trying to flee the area. So, but the point is, what would you assess the global solidarity movement? How would you assess it to be at this particular point? Can it have an impact right now in addressing some of these systemic injustices against the Rohingya?
Well, to begin with, it's good that you mentioned Malaysia. And, there was a huge trafficking crisis in 2015 where 8,000 Rohingya
Yes.
found themselves stuck in the middle of the ocean. And that continues. And the reason why Rohingya continue to try and leave and to make this arduous ocean journey is because the situation is that terrible, right? And Malaysia and Thailand have all been pushing back refugees, but we all know that international law, this is illegal. There's a principle of non-refoulement, which means that you cannot push back those that are, escaping persecution. And there's been a huge increase in hate speech in Malaysia. And for the first time, we saw earlier this year that a Malaysian mosque had signs outside saying Rohingya cannot come to this mosque. And this is unheard of, that a mosque would do this. But it is the people of Banda Aceh, I think, who are just amazing, because even when officials wouldn't go out, these people went to the ocean to the sea on their motorbikes with one bag of rice, with one shirt, whatever they could, and they helped these Rohingya ashore
in Indonesia,
for months.
In Indonesia. Yeah, in
specifically,
Aceh, right.
Specifically there. And speaking about the global solidarity movement, you're correct that, over the past 8 years, it's really gone from no one knowing to hardly anyone rather knowing to, everyone speaking about it. But it's also that, when governments are not willing to act because perhaps of, transactions and financial benefits and bilateral agreements. Exactly. Then the pressure is on civil society. And so as civil society, then we have to act. We have to put pressure on these embassies in our countries. We have to raise awareness around projects that are speaking about the Rohingya. And people have been doing amazing work. The Burma Task Force in the UK has put together a dirty list. So you just have to Google it. And when you go on, you'll see all sorts of companies, because, the biggest holder of assets in Myanmar is the military. And so the Burma Task Force has put together this list of companies who are doing, who are trading with the military and who are supporting military businesses. And so the boycott, of course, is a wonderful way that all of us can do something. Sorry about that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is always
civil disobedience and oftentimes uncivil disobedience as well. I mean, if governments are not responding to this, I mean, incredible case of injustice, that absolutely. I mean, very militant, nonviolent action, I think, would be required to compel
and people
governments.
have been, going into the streets. They've been protests. It's just that it's not enough at this stage. And so I think it's on all of us to push harder.
Absolutely. One of the things I did want to get to, and again, because it's so inspirational for all of us to hear about that. I know you, and I know that you do these things, and for you, it's part of being, it's part of being human, to express that type of solidarity. But you have gone to Bangladesh. You have worked with Rohingya refugees. In what capacity? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. So the organization that I represent is called Protect the Rohingya, and
Okay.
we've been working since 2012 to raise awareness around the Rohingya. But for the last 4 years, what we've been doing is running projects in the camp. So we had a winter school. We've also had a history project that we're still running. The big project we had in 2017 is that we sent a group of 3 female lawyers and a journalist into the camps to take witness statements from those who had just recently come across from the border, running from, running across from the military atrocities. And so these are the projects that we run in the camp. And we've been very fortunate because I know a lot of people want to go and give solidarity. We've had the ability to be there. And really nothing prepares you for how it feels to really be in the camp. And the thing about the Rohingya is their resilience,
Right.
Because it's not like 1 out of 10 people has experienced military atrocities or has experienced being abused or shot at or raped. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people. And despite that, despite literally leaving their homes with the clothes on their back, they are now living in the camps, finding ways to create informal schooling, little radio stations to inform each other, food projects, grow gardens. And yes, there is a lot of aid required because the Bangladeshi government doesn't allow the Rohingya to go out and seek employment. And so a lot of them are literally waiting for a handout. But to see what they've been able to do, and firstly, the fact that they're still standing after the things that they've been subjected to by the Myanmar military, it's really amazing.
No, absolutely. It seems, Shabnam, you have given an incredibly, I think, comprehensive, I mean, in such a short period of time, a very comprehensive overview of kind of the situation in general, the evolution of it, and what people are doing now. At least those people that have the consciousness that you have, and the conscience that you have, in order to intervene, to provide solidarity for the incredible criminal conduct of the Myanmar state, in alliance with many of these other states that are supportive of what's going on in terms of the cruelty towards the Rohingya refugees. So I think that our viewership really, I think, now has a sense, and I think that they ought to be motivated to join. I mean, you mentioned the group Protect the Rohingya.
There's also the Free Rohingya Coalition. There's the Burma Task Force. There are Fortify Rights. I mean, there are a lot of organizations, and you can find us on Facebook and on Twitter at Protect Rohingya, capital P, capital R. And we are running a news source for the past 8 years. So we're updating every week. So you will find all the information that you need. But I think the main thing for all of us to remember is that activist isn't someone out there. Like, it's not a concept hanging in the middle of the air, Activist
That's
is
why
all
I said
of us.
at the beginning that I know your allergy to this word, right? Okay.
So it's all of us, and it's what all of us are willing to do. And we can't just put the responsibility, out
on
there
Shabnam
on
Mayet
this, on this concept of activist, right?
Right.
And because when we're fighting for justice, there's literally no action too small. So listeners, or those watching today who go out and learn more, and then just tell one other person. If you're in school, in university, tell your class, whatever it is, just do that little bit, but do something, and that's going to count.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Wonderful. Shabnam, the final last thing, I know the time where you're supposed to be monitoring time this time. But anyways, the last thing that I wanted to ask you is that I know that you have had, throughout your adult life, a very special form of kind of solidarity, also with the Palestinians and others, but also with Kashmir and the situation in Kashmir, and your own kind of, in some ways, I don't want to say vicarious, but an attachment to Kashmir. I wanted to ask you, first of all, about how and this is because I know the story, but I want you to tell how your name came about, Shabnam, and in some ways has that the naming of this Shabnam, has that had an impact on kind of your own desire to kind of not only go to Kashmir, and I'm talking about Indian-occupied Kashmir, and the worsening situation there, as well as your own kind of commitment to demonstrate solidarity needed much more today than ever before with what's going on there. So a little bit about that, and we can end on that. It's a nice,
Well,
nice note.
as you know, my mom was reading a book and she liked the name. But the other thing was that there was always this image in our house, this photograph of my parents who had been on a holiday to Kashmir, and they were standing outside a houseboat, and it was a white houseboat with green paint that had my name printed on it. And I think I've always looked at that picture, and I've always wanted to go where that picture was. And
Right.
so yeah, it is kind of a strange story, but I mean, watching the
It's a
news
wonderful
and
story.
watching activists, like Arthur Zia and all of those on the ground in Kashmir, Mary Scully, who's very vocal online, and the late Michael Clinton, who I've been very fortunate to. Sorry about that. Oh, that is your alarm.
Yeah.
Sorry
Okay.
about that. That
Ignore
was
it. Right. Right.
so that was your cut-off alarm. But yes, all these activists doing really amazing work, on the Kashmiri issue and making sure that the story gets out. And I think it's so important because, like Myanmar, and as you know, Myanmar has had some of the longest internet blackouts in the world. In Bangladesh as well, in the Rohingya refugee camps, the internet only came on at the end of September, and in Kashmir as well. These are some of the longest internet blackouts in the world. And we know that when a government is blocking out the internet, then it basically means that they really just don't want anyone to know what's going on.
Precisely.
And they must be doing the most terrible things on the ground. And so, we have to thank activists who are working tirelessly to get those stories out. And I hope, all of you are closer. So I hope none of you are being silent about the terrible situation in Kashmir.
No, absolutely. But we know it's very close to your heart as well. But despite the incredible now repression taking place, your desire to go to Indian occupied Kashmir remains steadfast.
Hopefully in this lifetime.
No, very much. Inshallah, that will happen, and then certainly,
thank you.
We would love to facilitate that. Final thoughts: Prime Minister Imran Khan and his very vocal position on Kashmir. Thoughts of you, South Africans? Do they know? Have a sense of kind of the position that he has taken? Is he respected in South Africa by you?
I think that people in South Africa have been following very closely, and I remember how many people shared his talk at the UN. I hope he says more on the Rohingya, of course, but that's that's something we'll be waiting for. And it's a great fight that he has ahead of him. It's a great fight that all the Pakistanis have ahead of them. So we have to wish you all the best.
No, we'll definitely push him on that as well, on the Rohingya, because Advocate Shabnam Mayet has said so, and as I said, for all our viewership, I know that we have to end, otherwise Shaibai will kill me. Tonight it's been incredibly special because we have literally one of the leading human rights lawyers in the world, I think, in my humble opinion, with us tonight.
That is overkind, and thank you so much for your time. And I wish all your viewers the best, and I hope that they will be thinking about
our next show will be our next show will be a very detailed dissection of kind of South African culture and food and that type of thing. But this time we wanted to be a little bit more serious. Thank you, Shabnam, for joining us. All right. Take care and Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
All right.